Perhaps the only thing that scares pilots more than an engine failure or a sudden loss of cabin pressure is smoke in the cabin. Hello, I'm David Weeks, and welcome to another episode of Real World SF50 Flying. This one is titled the SF50 Smoke Removal Checklist. I've been flying professionally for over 50 years, starting as a CFI, then a charter pilot in light twins. I spent time as an air ambulance pilot in a Swearingen Metro and worked as a demonstration pilot for the Learjet factory. I had a 35-year airline career flying the 737-200 and 300, the A320 series, and I retired as a Boeing 787 captain. I'm also a current CFII. I've got over 650 hours in the SF50, and I'd like to share my SF50 experience with you. Now, there may be other YouTube channels that have glitzier production values than this one. I like to spend my time writing and teaching about the SF50, not doing post-production work. So just imagine this video is like a hangar chat session between friends. If you want to follow along when I have approach plates or charts on screen, I'll provide links to them in the show notes. Let me be clear that this video is not flight instruction. The Cirrus SF50 airplane flight manual is always controlling. Having smoke in the cabin and then having to perform the smoke removal checklist in the SF50 is perhaps the most demanding checklist we will ever have to deal with. This is especially demanding for single pilot operations. Let's discuss the SF50 smoke removal checklist in detail. Now, there's a lot more to safely handling smoke in the cabin and dealing with the ensuing loss of cabin pressurization and the subsequent emergency descent than simply following the AFM procedures. Doing the procedures correctly is required, but it's not sufficient to having a good outcome. We're going to be shutting off the vast majority of the aircraft systems, hand flying with only the PFD and display backup, and managing the flight plan and the radios with one Garmin touch controller. The smoke removal checklist has several steps in common with the emergency descent checklist. For a more detailed discussion of the emergency descent checklist, please watch my real-world SF50 flying video on the SF50 loss of cabin pressure and emergency descent. I'm not going to go into as much detail here as I do in that video. Let's assume that you and two passengers, one in the front with you and one in the middle row, are cruising along at flight level 310 at night above an undercast layer. The weather below us is easy IFR, with most airports in the vicinity reporting ceilings of 800 to 1,000 feet HEL and visibilities of 2 miles or so. Then, from somewhere under the instrument panel, you smell an acrid-smelling smoke and at the same time see a plume of grayish smoke start to come into the cabin from under the bolster panel switches. Smoke. We don't see any fire, but the smoke continues. Okay, Captain, what are you going to do? As with the emergency descent, do the memory items. This is where training should kick in. Good training will have you respond in a timely manner, and that means a steady, measured pace, but not rushing. As many instructors have said, don't hurry up to screw it up. Step 1, oxygen mask. Don, switch to emergency. 2, smoke goggles, if equipped. Don. 3, passenger oxygen deploy switch. Don. With smoke in the cabin, timely donning of the oxygen mask is doubly important. 1, we want to breathe oxygen under pressure. We don't want to breathe smoke. And 2, we're going to be dumping the cabin, and that means a loss of cabin pressure. As of this writing, Cirrus does not deliver SF50s with smoke goggles, and the Scott MD40 oxygen mask does not cover the eyes. Smoke goggles are available on Amazon. If you wear glasses, make sure to buy goggles that fit over your eyeglasses. Get your mask and goggles on right now. In my emergency descent video, I discussed time of useful consciousness. Remember, if you can't breathe, you can't fly. If you wear a headset with a large headband, the oxygen mask won't fit easily over the headband, so remember, headset off, oxygen mask on, emergency, and goggles on, and then headset on. Make sure you turn the flow selector knob to emergency, as the little red flow selector knob is set to 100%. Emergency gives you oxygen under positive pressure, and that will prevent smoke from getting into the mask. You'll know that you have it turned to emer, as you'll hear a steady hiss of oxygen flowing into the mask. In 100%, oxygen only flows when you breathe in due to the demand function of the mask. Push the mask mic selector to mask right after you pull your mask out. While it is not a memory item, it's probably the most often overlooked checklist item. Push the switch when your hand is right there. Now, hopefully you briefed your right front passenger on how to don the crew mask during the pre-flight safety briefing, right? While their mask mic switch is not a memory item and it's low priority, their mask mic switch needs to be switched to mask so they too can talk on the interphone. You have to manually deploy the passenger oxygen mask. The cabin is still pressurized, so there's no reason for those masks to deploy on their own. Once you've deployed the passenger oxygen mask, you have completed the memory items. Now, pull up the emergency procedures checklist and scroll to smoke removal. It's an emergency procedure, not a warning, as there is no CAS message to respond to. Step 6 is defog button on. You may recall that this makes 80% of the conditioned bleed air entering the cabin to be directed to the defog plenum. This means more air will be coming out the defog vents, and that means more, hopefully, non-smoky air in your face. Step 7 is cabin pressure dump button press. The cabin pressure dump button disables the pressurization controller and opens both outflow valves. With the bleed switch in bleed, the maximum cabin pressure altitude achieved during the dump is limited by the maximum cabin altitude limiter to 14,300 feet, plus or minus 300 feet. This step will exhaust as much smoke as possible out the outflow valves, which are located at the bottom of the aft pressure bulkhead. However, if the smoke continues, it may very well build up again. Until this point, we've been flying on autopilot in cruise flight, but once we dump the cabin, an emergency descent is mandatory. Declare an emergency. At this point, I'd take just a couple seconds to call ATC. For example, Center, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Vision 666 has smoke in the cockpit and will be doing an emergency descent to 15,000 feet. I will call you back. This lets ATC know your intentions and also not to start barraging you with the usual say intentions, fuel on board, and souls on board questions that the controller is obligated to ask. To be sure, time is important when dealing with smoke in the cabin. While some pilots feel it's important to start disabling electrical circuits as soon as any smoke is detected, or even before beginning an emergency descent, the checklist has to wait until you reach the bottom of your emergency descent to begin turning off switches. Maintaining positive aircraft control is paramount, and doing an emergency descent with only the emergency bus powering the aircraft may very well put aircraft control at risk. Step 9. Bleed switch below 14,000 feet, fresh. This closes the purse-off valve, thus stopping any potentially smoky bleed airflow and lets outside air into the aircraft. Now, one critical thing to think about is if you still need to wear the oxygen mask. While 14,000 feet MSL may be low enough to technically not require supplemental oxygen for the pilot, what if there's still smoke in the airplane? You would still want to wear the mask and have O2 under positive pressure. Step 10, ECS disable. Select. The ECS disable button on the ECS control panel disables all air conditioning components and sets the flow control valve flow setting to low, the defog valve to defog, and the bleed bias valve to distribute ECS bleed air forward. Step 11, fire extinguisher, as required. This is the time to undo the Velcro strap holding the fire extinguisher in place under the right side bolster panel. Chapter 20 of the Pilot's Information Manual has the following warning. The fire extinguisher should be only used in 2-second blasts. and additional shots should only be used if necessary to extinguish the fire. Inhalation of the complete discharge of the fire extinguisher may result in cardiotoxicity and/or anesthetic effects to the occupants. Occupants shall use emergency oxygen masks during and after fire extinguisher use. If the cause of the fire is readily apparent and accessible, use the fire extinguisher to extinguish flames and land as soon as possible. Regardless of smoke evidence, if there is no visual confirmation that fire has been extinguished following fire suppression and/or smoke evacuation, land as soon as possible. Step 12. All other switches except BAT2 to off. Step 12 is a big deal. You turn off every switch on the bolster panel except BAT2, which will now power the emergency bus. Both generators and BAT1 are off. BAT2 should last for approximately 60 minutes. And incidentally, the need for BAT2 to last 60 minutes is why we do not take off with the yellow caution CAS message, take off emer BAT. That message is telling us that BAT2 is not fully charged. Now you'll lose the MFD, COM2, GPS2, flaps, normal landing gear extension or retraction, and a whole bunch of other systems. You'll be in display backup mode. One other critical system that will not be available is the autopilot. This means hand flying until touchdown, assuming you do not bring BAT1 or a generator back online at some point. However, the flight director is powered by the emergency bus, so you should still be able to use it. If you have the mental bandwidth to use it, the flight director will make staying on course and altitude much, much easier. The checklist does not exactly tell you how to turn off the bolster panel switches. Be very careful. Now, some pilots say to turn off the switches from right to left. But if you do that and you turn off the master oxygen switch before you turn off BAT1 and Gen 1 and Gen 2, you have just closed the master oxygen valve and you will not have oxygen. But if you turn off the switches from left to right and turn off BAT1 and Gen 1 and Gen 2 before moving further to the right, you cut off the power to the master oxygen valve and it will fail in its current position, which is on, so you still have oxygen. With BAT2 only on, what systems do you have left? The emergency bus provides power for the flight instruments critical to continued safe flight, including the engine fire protection system, the left probe heater, PFD and GTC 2A, GTC 1A touchscreens, AHARS 1, ADAHARS 3, NAVCOM 1, GPS 1. GTC 1 will now display the standby attitude and airspeed indicator. You will still have crew lights, caps, fuel valve 1, and landing gear indications only. Note that I said indications. You have to plan for a manual landing gear extension, and that is not mentioned in the checklist. Look at pages 11-10 and 11-11 of the pilot's information manual to see a graphic of which circuits are on which buses. Step 12 then has an if statement pointed out by a black diamond. If setting switches off eliminates fire or fume source and airplane is in night or IFR conditions. Now, it may take a little while for the smoke to begin to clear with the faulty circuit depowered. The checklist is telling you that if the smoke or fire has stopped and it's night or instrument condition, then you may elect to turn on systems you need one at a time. Personally, I would wait at least 30 seconds between each switch activation to see if the smoke reoccurs. However, turning on switches that are on the main or essential buses does nothing, since those buses are not powered with only BAT2 on. If only BAT2 is on, then only the emergency bus is powered. If you need a system that is not powered by the emergency bus, you have to turn on either BAT1 or Gen 1. Either one will power the main and essential buses. You can also turn on Gen 2 if you need an essential bus system, but Gen 2 will not power the main bus. Let's look at what systems you could consider turning back on. Strobe lights, landing lights, and ice lights. In my opinion, only the landing lights would be needed, and then only for landing at night. They're powered by the essential bus, so you would need BAT 1, Gen 1, or Gen 2 to power them. 2. Fresh air. This is my personal opinion, but no, don't turn that back to bleed, as we would want to stay unpressurized and get outside air into the cabin through the ram air duct. If the smoke was related to the bleed air system, then turning the bleed back on is just asking for that trouble to reoccur. Probe heat. The left side pitot heat is powered by the emergency bus. Now, if you are so unlucky as to be in ice conditions, you may wish to turn the probe heat back on. If the right pitot tube ice is over, you may very well get an airspeed IAS comparator cast message. If no other source of power is on, then only the left probe heater will be powered. The right probe heat and the AOA heater are powered by the essential bus, so that would require BAT 1 or either generator to power the essential bus. 4. Engine ice protection system. This system is powered by the essential bus, so it too would require BAT 1 or either generator to power the essential bus. Wing and stab ice protection system. This system is powered by the essential bus, so it too would require BAT 1 or either generator to power the essential bus. Windshield IPS. This system also powered by the essential bus, so it requires BAT 1 or either generator to power the essential bus. But if you are in day VMC conditions, the checklist does not have you turn anything back on. With step 12 complete, we are now down to step 13, which says land as soon as possible. At this point, you need to evaluate the nearest suitable airport, the weather, the status of the smoke or fire, and how quickly you can make a landing at the chosen airport. Fortunately, we always have the ability to pull caps in the SF50, and that's always an option. But just for the purposes of this training video, let's assume that we choose to land the airplane. When you have active smoke in the cabin, what's a suitable airport? I would submit that any airport where you can get the airplane safely stopped on the runway is suitable. Overrunning a too short field would not be a happy ending to a successful smoke removal procedure. Let's say that there's a 3,000-foot long runway 10 miles away. Okay, how's the weather? Do you need to shoot an instrument approach to land there? How fast can you set up the approach using one GTC for both the flight plan and switching ATC frequencies? What if ATC can vector you to a VFR airport a little further away? It might be worth a few extra minutes to not have to set up an unfamiliar instrument approach flying on emergency power. Regardless of the airport you choose, you need to remember that the flaps are inoperative as they are on the essential bus, and that you will have to use the alternate gear extension checklist, as the normal gear extension needs the main bus, and the smoke removal checklist does not tell you those two things. Also, the alternate gear extension checklist does not tell you that you will not be able to retract the landing gear if you have to do a go-around. The landing gear system is on the main bus, but don't forget that the alternate gear extension checklist has you pull the hydraulic pump circuit breaker. So even if you have the main bus powered, the gear won't retract as the hydraulic pump is not powered. In any emergency, especially a demanding one like this, use ATC as a resource as much as possible. The controller can get you weather and NOTAMs and runway length information, thus saving you the time to do it by hand when you're hand flying the airplane in display backup mode with the oxygen mask on. Use ATC to request crash, fire, and rescue equipment at the new destination. If you're in a radar environment and need time to prepare for an instrument approach, ask for delay vectors. Hopefully you won't need delay vectors if there's still active smoke in the cabin. Once you've decided on a new destination, you probably need to enter it into the G3000. Now, if you're in day VMC conditions and can see the airport, have the weather, and you know the runway is long enough, You got that info from the air traffic controller. You do not have to enter the new destination. We're depressurized, so entering the landing field elevation is unnecessary. Having an electronic backup for a visual approach is good to have, but if you are trying to get on the ground as quickly as possible, the extra workload and button pushing is just going to add more workload. But if it's dark, remember it is much easier and safer to have an electronic glide path, especially at unfamiliar airports. So I would strongly recommend changing the destination airport so you can at least enter a visual approach to the landing runway. If you're IFR, you have to change the destination. There are several ways to change the destination in the G3000. My preferred method is this. On the flight plan page, scroll down to see the current destination. Tap to select it. Choose Delete Destination. Then tap the Now Empty Destination field and enter the new destination airport code. Then you can go to the procedure page and choose the desired runway and approach. Confirm this on the flight plan page when done. Now, how fast do you want to go? In emergencies, the natural tendency is to fly as fast as you can to get to the destination. In our example, we have smoke in the cabin. So who wouldn't want to fly 250 knots to get to the field and land? Going fast is fine, except for two things. One, you have to remember that you will have no flaps and will have to manually extend the gear. Those two checklists will take time and attention. You will not be able to fly 210 knots indicated to 10 miles out and 170 to 5 miles out, as the plane won't slow down normally without flaps. Now, if you so choose, you could elect to turn on BAT 1 or Gen 1 for enough time to extend the flaps and lower the landing gear manually and turn it back off. Hopefully, this will not power up the system that caused the smoke in the first place, but it takes less than 15 seconds to lower the landing gear. If you choose to not turn on BAT 1 or Gen 1 for normal gear and flap extension, then make sure you plan ahead and slow down early enough to be configured at the proper flaps up VREF with the gear manually extended and all checklists complete by about a 5-mile final or before entering the downwind leg. 2, it would be worse than embarrassing to have to do a go-around with smoke in the cabin because you went too fast for too long. The gear will stay down on a go-around as the hydraulic pump circuit breaker was pulled if you did the alternate gear extension procedure. Speaking from personal experience in the simulator, I can guarantee you that in the heat of the moment during an unplanned go-around, you will not remember to reset the circuit breaker and power up the main bus to raise the gear. If you do raise the gear handle from force of habit, within 30 seconds or so, you're going to see a yellow landing gear fail indication, which is displayed when the gear has not reached the selected position. Lastly, the plane won't be climbing at its usual rate. Once on the ground, bring the airplane to a complete stop and do the memory items for an evacuation. Engine knob off, engine button press, BAT 1 and 2 switches off, parking brake set, egress aircraft through the exits. So far, we treated the emergency as though you're going to fly the airplane to the nearest suitable runway. But the SF50 does have caps, so let's talk a bit about smoke removal and a caps pull. Now, by definition, most of your flight time is in cruise flight. If we're going to have a smoke or fire, it'll probably happen in cruise. Personally, I don't think that a caps pull at flight level 310 is desirable. You're going to be stuck inside a smoky or burning airplane while it descends under the chute at an average of roughly 1,700 feet per minute. It may take 18 minutes to drift down to sea level terrain. You have no ability to control your chute landing zone with a caps pull at such a high altitude. I would strongly recommend following the checklist, do the emergency descent down to 14,000 feet or lower with a minimum safe altitude depending on terrain. You're going to get down a whole lot faster in an emergency descent than under the chute. If you follow the checklist and still cannot get rid of the smoke or fire, then consider a caps pull. If you can see the ground, I would think about another rapid descent down to about 2,000 feet above ground level, maneuver to be upwind of the most suitable landing spot, and then pull caps. You'll be on the ground in just over 1 minute. If you cannot see the ground, then pull caps at your current lower altitude. Don't forget, tell ATC that you're going to pull caps and to do the caps checklist. I use the one on the caps safety pin streamer. In my airplane, the streamer stays in the little cubby under the autopilot control panel when it's not in use, so it's readily available. Having smoke or fire in the aircraft is probably the most demanding mercy for any pilot, especially a single pilot with no first officer. You have to keep your cool, know your memory items, maintain positive control of the aircraft at all times, and make an educated decision about where to land. You need to manage your workload while going as fast as is safe to get the plane on the ground. I hope this discussion has increased your understanding of the smoke removal checklist. I hope you never have to deal with these smoke removal checklists in flight. I'm David Weeks, and thanks for watching this episode of Real World SF50 Flying.